Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson, and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. Well, this is part two of our program. We're speaking with Dr. David Kingsley, and he is a professor, retired, and he's done quite a bit of research, and he is a research buff based on his bio. And he likes to deal with social justice and political issues. So we've had a very good conversation the first half of the show, and we're basically talking about the recent elections and some of the dynamics that played a part of that election and the outcome. This part of our program, we're going to talk about some work that he has been doing. And the title here is A Guaranteed Annual Income, a Bad Idea as Usually Proposed. Talk to us about your position on that paper, please.
Well, a guaranteed annual income can be handled in a number of ways. It could say, well, we're going to give you $10,000 a year so you can survive. That's the kind of guaranteed annual income I'm not in favor of. And that's what we have happening in the United States today is an economic restructuring is taking place. A study at Oxford indicates that in about 10 years, 50% of the jobs that exist today won't be here. So conservatives who are opposed to government assistance for people who are unemployed or can't find a job know that we have a crisis coming down the road. In fact, we have a crisis right now with only about 68% of the workers participating in the labor force because robots can do a lot of the work that humans can do much cheaper than humans, so we're replacing people with robots. Mm-hmm. We're shipping jobs to cheaper labor markets. That's going to intensify over the next few years. So conservatives and liberals are talking about what do we do about people who can't get a job, because we're not going to need all these folks in the workplace. We don't need them now. So the idea of a guaranteed annual income was actually proposed by Richard Nixon back in 1972, believe it or not. It didn't fly. But that would be one kind of a guaranteed annual income. I don't see that as a good idea because what that does is it takes away people's humanity. As human beings, we need to work. Mm-hmm. I think we should put an income floor under everybody in society, that no one's going to be forced to live below a certain level of income, like let's say 15, 20,000. 10,000 is going to be pretty hard. Now, I would be in favor of, say, 10,000 or 15,000 a year guaranteed annual income if we had housing in a safe neighborhood for folks, if we had ways for them to do productive work, to grow and develop as a human being, and not just get a check. I've actually, when I was in the mining industry, I was on the Navajo reservation, and I saw what happens to a culture when a subsidy is given to an individual, but there's no opportunity to do work, mm-hmm. to contribute to society. So I would say that I would be more in favor of saying, listen, you will have a job. Mm-hmm. It may not be in industry, but we need to fix up the parks. We need to rehab houses that are in neighborhoods where we see houses deteriorating. So we'll train you on carpentry skills. If you want to go further than that, education is free. You can go to college. You can improve yourself. If people don't have that, they will deteriorate. I've seen this happen to indigenous populations of Australia, where their culture's destroyed. So that's basically, the guaranteed annual income with nothing. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm really opposed to.
When we were talking about poverty, we were talking about more than just dollars in your pocket. When we're talking about poverty, we're talking about lack of unemployment. We're talking about usually poor or little or no education. We're talking about lack of housing, lack of medical care. So many issues fall into poverty, and sometimes if one or two of those are missing, it just throws that person in a tizzy. But when you think about how poor people have been castigated, denigrated, it's like they are the enemy.
That's right.
And sometimes it is no fault of their own. Speak to us a little bit about that.
You're right. You're in poverty if you can't function as a whole person in society, which means you have transportation, which means you have a way to get to work, you have a way to get education, you have the medical care, the housing, the safe neighborhood to live in. It's not a simple matter of what's your income, although we define it that way. And then, as you say, we then look at these poor people as a problem. Mm-hmm. And the enemy, perhaps, because I think there's a certain amount of guilt that we have about people who are in poverty, but the way to deal with that guilt is to find fault with them, to say it's their fault. If they would just go get a job, if they would just try harder. It's pretty hard to go get a job when you don't have transportation to get there. The job's not there, or if the job is there, it's going to pay $7.25 an hour, which is not enough to survive on, especially if you don't have housing available, you don't have medical care, you don't have education. So we scapegoat, and the scapegoating gets worse for African American people than it is for white people. But either way, it's going to be the folks living in the trailer parks, the folks living in the ghettos, are then, well, why don't those folks just pull themselves up by their bootstrap?
Mm-hmm. You touched on something here. Two questions. When and why did the word liberal become a bad word, whereas Democrats run away from it and Republicans use it as a weapon?
That's pretty historical, and when I say historical, since the rise of a more fascist right wing, that's one of their tactics, is to denigrate liberalism. And unfortunately, liberals have had a tendency to not fight that, to sort of take it. Liberals tend to be rather passive and acquiescent in those kinds of attacks. It's kind of like the bully that says, I'm going to take your lunch money. Give me your lunch money. You figure, well, if I'm nice to this bully, he won't take my lunch money tomorrow. You know? Or if he takes half of my lunch money, he won't take the rest. He won't want more. Liberals have kind of brought that on themselves because they have, in my view, and I think history bears this out, where you look at where autocratic movements have taken over countries, the liberal socialists and the liberals have tended to be very passive in that, and thinking, well, we can work with these people. I'm hearing the same thing right now. There was a column in the New York Times this morning by Dahlia Lithwick. Hey, Democrats, fight back. Fight like the Republicans. So that's a liberal tendency, and the Republicans can smell that. They can smell weakness. Let's attack, because these guys are going to back up. And then when they back up, we'll attack them some more, and they'll try to be nice to us. And
you attack them some more.
Yeah, we'll attack them some more. Exactly. And that's been going on now for half a century, and it's gotten really scary.
You're talking about the fact here that when you look at the population, let's just stick to the state of Missouri. The population of the state of Missouri, you probably have maybe anywhere from 17 to 18% African American in the whole state. But the face on poverty is black. Politicians have used that tremendously to say, these government programs, they're going to these black folk, and so you need to vote me in so that I can do something about that. And when you have more than 80% of the population, let's say 70-some% of the population probably white, so therefore you're going to have more white poor folk,
Right.
but they will vote against their own self-interest because the politicians have convinced them that these government programs that are designed to help pull people up are black programs.
That's right.
And so that means housing, medical assistance, food stamps, all those type programs that are designed to assist people, and they vote people in that's going to vote against those programs.
That's right, and you've got it exactly right. The conservatives have been very good at convincing the media and the rest of society that all of this government costs that we're putting out for welfare, for whatever, is because black folks. It's not because of poor folks in general.
Mm-hmm.
And never mind that there's been a huge amount of discrimination. It's what Gunnar Myrdal called in his famous study, he called it the vicious circle theory.
Mm-hmm.
You discriminate against people, and then you take the results of that discrimination to discriminate more. Mm-hmm. The media picks up on that. If you notice a thing that happens, if you see poor people, mm-hmm. it's a black person and a white person helping them. Mm-hmm. Watch the news, okay? It's Thanksgiving. We're going to hand out food to the poor people. So it's a white person handing out food to a black person. Mm-hmm. If you see a school where the students aren't doing well, it's a black student with a white teacher trying to help them. Mm-hmm. This is a constant way of presenting a group of people. It's not right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you look at the federal, for instance, crime, the FBI crime reports, uniform crime right. reports, if you look at who commits the most crimes, it's whites. Mm-hmm. Watch your local news every night, and it starts with 3 or 4 stories about African-American men mm-hmm. committing crimes. I mean, Kansas City, I don't care what channel, CBS, ABC, NBC, they start every local newscast every night mm-hmm. with black crime. Mm-hmm. So when whites think about criminals, it's black criminals. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to Donald Trump, because mm-hmm. then Donald Trump can say to a large swath of the white population, large enough to get him in office, hey, look, you need me because of these people over here, and I'll do something about that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be the law and order president. So that's worked pretty doggone well mm-hmm. over the years for the Republicans.
In your paper, you spoke about the issue of need. Individuals in need can and often become vulnerable, resulting in harassment and even incarceration, scapegoating, and blame for societal problems and deterioration of a population. Speak to the factors impacting the lives of the poor, the unemployed, the mentally ill that are out there.
Well, yeah, in an economic system that we have, the economic system can't meet the needs. Less and less can they meet the needs. And it's not just capitalism, but this is a radical form of free market capitalism. It's sort of a social Darwinist thing. So people who get sort of shunted out of that system begin to suffer. They begin to deteriorate, really. And then they become vulnerable because they're living in a neighborhood that will become over-policed. They'll start looking for reasons to pull these people over, and we now have a system of incarceration that's become a huge bureaucracy. So we need to put people in there. We need to process people through this system. So who's most vulnerable? If you go out to a very affluent suburb and you start doing that, you're going to run into some lawyers. You're going to run into powerful political people. That doesn't happen if it's a black neighborhood. I think that's part of the reason. Another reason is if you have masses of poor people without work, then you have to begin to worry about people who are going to rise up. And so you've got to keep them under control. Mm. And how do you keep them? Through surveillance, through over-policing, through incarceration. You become very weak in the criminal justice system.
Thinking about the criminal justice system here, politicians are all of a sudden have become very interested in decriminalizing a number of crimes that people were once locked up and thrown and the key thrown away for. And you know, the average person don't understand that it's not about all of a sudden they have this good feeling in their heart about people who may have committed a minor crime, you know, marijuana charge or something, and get all this time in jail, or crack versus cocaine, all of those type issues. It's not about wanting to do the right thing. It's about trying to reduce the state's budget, the amount of money they spend on incarceration. And so, but they don't present it out there. You know, it's the state has gotten themselves into a financial bind, locking all these folks up. Now they can't afford to keep them locked up. And so now they are releasing folk. It's painful.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, we're 2.4 million people incarcerated, more than any other country in the world, practically. I have maybe one or two others, like China. And operating budgets for the prison system are really high. It's, you know, you can build a prison, then you have to operate the thing, you know. And there's a couple of ways to look at that. I don't think we're going to appreciably reduce the prison system right now. Whether how much we're going to increase it, I don't know. But you, like I say, you have two types of prison systems: the private and the public.
Right.
The private system is a very profitable exercise, and then you throw in the immigration, where you have people rounded up by ICE, the Immigration Control and Enforcement, I think it's called. That's a lot of people that the Corrections Corporation of America have beds for, and they get paid by the number of beds they have, and they're going to run those prisons like they run, like nursing homes will run, you know, bare bones.
Right.
We're going to get, we're looking at our bottom line, and then when you look at the public system of prisons, it's like we built these prisons.
So we got to fill them.
We've got to fill them. And then you have like I say, a proto-fascist conservative overlay, which is running these state legislatures, are really not just your traditional conservatives, but real right-wing conservatives who don't have too much respect for Fourth Amendment rights. So we start putting people in these prisons, and you know, they're willing to spend the money. They've got the money. We can afford prisons. Yeah, it costs us money, but and could we spend the money better? Yeah, we sure can, but that doesn't fit their milieu. That doesn't fit how they see the world.
Michelle Alexander, author of the book entitled The New Jim Crow, chronicled institutional, governmental design and implemented racism going back to the 1930s, 40s, and even further back, talking about Reconstruction a whole bit. Richard Nixon, in his war on crime, war on drugs, has been perpetually generated over years to get us to where we are now. And the thing that gets me here is that people who are just doing their job, lawyers, police officers, probation officers, all these folks just doing their job, but they are part of the system who are being used to perpetuate a racist system.
Right.
And so, you know, get tough on drugs. Therefore, the law enforcement get out there and they bust people for a little bit of nothing. They plant stuff on folk, you know, to get their numbers up. The whole bit.
Right.
The lawyers play and the prosecutors play their part in it. You know, the judge. Now they've got it where the judge is constrained as about what kind of sentences he can give. So even these people who are just saying, I'm just making a living, I'm just doing my job, but they're part of the problem.
That's right. And she calls it, and I agree with her, racialized population control. Again, that's going back to why are we doing this? I lived in Los Angeles. And Fusion Television just had a great documentary on this. Chief Parker started in 1954 to militarize his city police force. All the other cities copied him. They became militarized. They weren't your friendly cop who walked the beat and Mrs. Jones would give him a piece of pie.
Right.
It became, we're not going to fraternize with people. They went into the Watts area in the early 1950s, they went into the Watts area of Los Angeles and they began to harass day in and day out. You walk across a certain street, you're in the wrong neighborhood. It was exactly like what we're seeing with broken windows theory, with James Q. Wilson's idea of stop and frisk. It was in the black community. So they said, you're here, you're in this area, you're confined to this area, and we will be in this area and we will watch you. And that's what happened. And that was copied all over the United States. People don't understand. I was in Los Angeles when the Watts, what they call riot, but it was really a rebellion. People were just fed up. In that kind of a situation, an incident will spark it. So we've had that, and that's not really changed, because now what the black communities particularly are experiencing is the warrant. We can pull you over for a broken taillight. We find a warrant because you can get warrants and then you can't pay it. It's kind of, it's like being put in the poorhouse, because you put in jail because you can't pay the fine.
Right.
Yeah, and why are you being pulled over? And we know that the stops are disproportionately poor black people, not just poor African Americans. So we know that's happening. And by the way, I want to mention a Supreme Court case that just came down, which is really scary, called Straith versus Utah, or Utah versus Straith. A black man in Utah was stopped by a cop for no reason. That's illegal. You can't, based on American law and jurisprudence, you can't stop somebody. It happened. The Utah Supreme Court, well, when he was stopped for no reason, the cop was fishing, and he found a warrant. When he found a warrant, then he searched the car and found some drugs. Those drugs should not have been allowed as evidence in the trial. They were. The Utah Supreme Court overturned the conviction, said this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, 5-3, because there's 8 justices, because Breyer joined the 4 conservatives, said no, he can do that. They can stop you for no reason. Now that's totally new in American jurisprudence. And I suggest people Google that and read Sotomayor's dissent, where she said, listen, there's 1 million people in a warrant database in this country, and they're mostly minorities. What this is an open invitation to police to go fishing. And whites have to keep in mind that, when you start when your constitutional liberties begin to deteriorate, they can be used against you too. So I think that's what we're seeing. It never really changed in this country. It's just been a constant thread of denigration of the Fourth Amendment, which was directed mostly at African American folks as a means of control. And I think that's what Michelle Alexander's getting at there. And then along comes these neoconservatives in the 1960s and saying, you really can't rehabilitate criminals. You need tougher penalties. You just need to lock people up. So they gave a big impetus to the idea that you can't help these people, lock them up. And that disproportionately hit black folks.
As you said that, what do you believe the term white privilege mean, and what do you think the average Caucasian think white privilege mean? Because when you said that black folk are being locked up and being stopped for no reason, but a police officer can make up any kind of reason to stop you. I mean, we know that, and they do it all the time. But what do you think? What do you think white privilege is, and what do you think the average Caucasian think white privilege is?
I think like I think. I can drive, I get in my car and drive from Kansas City to Jefferson City. I don't worry about police. If I were a black person, I would be worried. If I got pulled over, I'd be scared to death. I'm driving today thinking, well, I got my wallet in my coat. I wear my, keep my wallet in my coat pocket. So if I'm pulled over and the police says, I want to see your driver's license, I reach for my coat, he's probably not going to shoot me and kill me. But if you were African American and you reach for your coat, you might get shot. Okay, so that's part of white privilege. White privilege is, I go into a store, I don't worry about people looking at me, follow me around. I've always gone for a job. I didn't worry about how this interviewer is going to look at me as a black man. It's not a problem for me. It's a constant image that's indoctrinated. You know, we're so indoctrinated with race in this country. I don't care if you're white, you're really well-meaning, you're trying really hard, including me. You still have been so ingrained with white-black, with images that just are constant. Well, I used to teach a class on race relations, and I would get people to see things that they never knew were there. They just didn't know. For instance, watching the 5 o'clock news, okay? Now you see, okay, there's 3 stories on black men committing crimes. Now go look at the FBI crime reports and look at the reality of who's committing crimes. The crimes that they're focused on, and it's just constant. So whites think, oh, well, it's those black people that are committing crimes. I don't have to worry about people accusing me, you know, or thinking about me that way. I don't have to worry about going to get a job and filling out an application and saying I have a felony on my record, that sort of thing. So it's jobs, it's education, it's the school system I got to go to versus, say, the east side of Kansas City. I could walk to school. They've closed all the schools on the east side of Kansas City. You know, they don't worry in Johnson County about walking to school. If you live in Brookside, they don't have public schools. They go to private schools. If you're a charter school, it may be way out somewhere, a good charter school. Well, a poor kid can't get to that school, and so the kid from the ghetto can't get out there. You know, it's just so constant, and it's just so overwhelming. And whites don't see it. They've been taught not to see it.
Yeah. And we wake up every day.
Yes.
Realizing that we have to navigate the system.
Yes.
You know, you know, I don't wake up and saying, I'm black, I have to navigate the system. But when I walk out my door, I understand I have to navigate the system.
That's right.
You know, and so the thing here is that racism is so prevalent, but it has been so clouded and has been so PC to say, well, you know, no, I'm not racist, I'm colorblind. Well, I don't want you to be colorblind. I want you to see me as who I am. But I think, you know, until, and the one good thing that I see as we come to a close, the one thing possibility I see coming out of the Trump administration is that people are going to have to open their eyes. Because if what has transpired during the election continues, and based on some of the people that have been appointed, some of this stuff is going to continue, people are going to have to open their eyes. Young folk, both black and white, don't mind going to the streets. And if we're not careful, we're going to have people in the streets throughout this country, because, you know, it's not the way it used to be.
You know, I think you got a good point there. I'd rather deal with an out-and-out bigot, because I can deal with that, than with a more sophisticated form of racism. We're not racist. We're colorblind here. But with Trump, I think we're going to get a real dose of treatment that will cause people to stand back and look, because I still believe that the Trump supporters are a minority in this country. They went and voted. You know, it's that simple. And the other side didn't, even though the other side got more votes, but they didn't vote enough. You know? Yeah. So I think you're right. I think this could be. Sometimes you have to let the reality come forward so you can confront it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dr. Kingsley, thank you so much for taking your time to come to Jefferson City from Kansas City. we'd like to have you back again.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. This has been great. Anytime we can get the word out, that's what I want to do. I say I retired from teaching, but I still teach, you know, and I still want to speak to the public. We got a lot of education to do, and I think you're doing a great job of it here.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Well, we hope that we have touched on some issues today that maybe you have not thought about, maybe you have thought about it but not deeply. I ask you to do something for me. If you don't have it already, read the new Jim Crow. Then talk to people just in your circle about what you got out of the book and what it means to them. I think your eyes will be opened. And we're waiting on your book to see what it says.
Okay.
When do you expect it out?
Oh, about a year.
About a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did a paper at the American Political Science Association conference, and then a publisher picked up the paper and said, will you do a book on this?
Okay.
So
Okay.
take me about a year to get that done.
Okay. Okay. Well, here again, and before I close, the doctor was also one of the Medicaid 23.
That's right.
And so we...
Proudly.
Yeah. So we had an opportunity to get to know each other as we were trying to encourage the legislature to pass Medicaid expansion. Don't know whether it would ever happen in the state of Missouri, unfortunately. Hey, we'll see you next time. God bless.